Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to do my first half of December wrap-up. I have found that I have been unable to sort of get back into fiction reading, so most of these are going to be nonfiction reads still, even though nonfiction November is over. I am just on a roll with the nonfiction, and it's great. So let's just get to it. The first book I finished was the one real fiction book so far this month, and that is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I read this to complete the 2017 Read Harder Challenge from Book Riot. This was the last book that I needed to fulfill all the prompts for the 24 different challenges within that Read Harder Challenge, and I absolutely love this book. It was a 5-star read for me. I had thought that I must have read The Color Purple when I was in high school, but it turns out I've just accumulated knowledge of this book through popular culture and osmosis, I guess. So this story is about Celie, who is black and poor and growing up in the South. The very first page on the very first chapter is just heartbreaking. There's a lot of abuse in this book, so trigger warnings for sexual abuse, physical abuse, all the things that you would expect a book like this to be about. But what surprised me about this book was the heart and the warmth of it. This was not a book of tragedy, although tragic things happen to Celie and her sister, the two characters that we follow throughout the narrative. But what is just so heartwarming and lovely about this book is the way that the female characters lift each other up and support one another and get each other through hard times, and how they find love both with members of the opposite sex and with each other. And it just ends on such a positive note that I just loved it. It was just a beautiful story, and I can see why it's considered a classic by an author of color. This book I got at a used bookstore, and it completely fell apart as I was reading it. I literally was taking out, individual pages to finish this book. I loved it that much. I couldn't stop to go get another version at the library or whatever. I had to just keep reading. So definitely a great book. If you have not read The Color Purple by Alice Walker, please do give it a try. It's a fantastic book. The next few books that I've completed were audiobooks. Thank God for audiobooks this month. It has been so incredibly busy that if it was only my physical book reading, we wouldn't have much to talk about. The very first thing that I read on audio was all because of Vanessa over at Split Reads. Let's see if we can... Oh, can you see that? It's Dear Fahrenheit 451 by Annie Spencer. I apologize for not being able to get... Let's see if that... There we go. Now we can see it. And this is a nonfiction, and this is a memoir of a librarian's love letters and breakup notes to the books in her life. So the subtitle of this is Love and Heartbreak in the Stacks. And so Annie Spence writes these. They're just all short little vignettes. The first part of the book is all letters that she writes to particular books. And they're funny, they're sweet, they're heartwarming, and it just goes from these sort of letters to books in her life to another section that's just sort of little, I want to say just little snippets, little short essays about the books. It was fun to listen to on audio. It was perfect for this time of year when your concentration is so fractured and you can't really focus on anything intensely. I found this the perfect read for this time of year, and if you love books and reading, you really should give this a try. Thank you, Vanessa. It was the perfect book at the perfect time for me. The next audiobook I completed was, I wanted to go on to something funny and sort of holiday oriented, and I'd heard a lot about this book, Holidays on Ice by David Sedaris. I thought it was going to be nonfiction, like memoir, sort of funny stories about his life, but it turns out it's a mixture of essays and short stories. So there were some fiction works interspersed throughout the nonfiction stuff. And the very first section is and I don't know if it's true or not, but was talking about being an elf in New York City at one of the department stores, and his experiences like acting as an elf as people come in to have their pictures taken with Santa. And he has a very dry, sardonic tone, and the author reads it himself. It was funny, it was amusing, perfect for a holiday. I don't know that I would continue on with anything else by David Sedaris. I think that his voice, probably not his personal voice, but the voice of his stories could probably get tiresome to me. But for this particular month and for my frame of mind right now, I found it entertaining and I enjoy it. The next audiobook that I completed was this one, and it's This Is My Face, Try Not to Stare by Gabourey Sidibe. Gabourey Sidibe is an actress. She was the main character in the book. In the film adaptation of the book, I believe it was Push by Sapphire, and I think the movie was called Precious because that was the name of the main character. And Gabourey Sidibe was not an actress already. She just sort of by chance had got asked if she would audition for the role of Precious and blew away the casting crew and got the role, and has since gone on to star in other works like Empire, and has done some directing, and this is her memoir of her life growing up and what it's like to be a woman of color and a fat woman of color in today's society. And her dad is Senegalese and her mom is American, African American, and it's all about her life growing up with that background. And I found it, she has a wonderful voice. She reads it herself. Her story is very similar. It actually reminded me a lot of In the Country We Love by I can't think of her. I'm sorry if you can hear that pounding. My husband is upstairs doing a home improvement project while I try to film this, so I apologize for any random knocking you hear. But this book by Gabourey Sidibe reminded me a lot of In the Country We Love by Diane Guerrero. Had a similar tale of, growing up as the child of immigrants to this country, of being a person of color growing up in America today, and finding your way sort of unexpectedly into the entertainment industry. But Gabourey Sidibe has an even funnier style and delivery, I think, and I just really enjoyed her story and really enjoyed the audiobook very much. So if you're looking for a celebrity memoir that sort of touches on some deeper political issues and also social issues, I would definitely recommend This Is Not My Face by Gabourey Sidibe. The next book I finished, I just completed last night, and I blew through this book in 2 sittings. And again, I've got to thank those of you on BookTube who have been reading this recently and talking about it. It gave me the push to pick it up. I think the first person I heard talk about it was Rebecca over on All the Books podcast. She very much enjoyed it. And this is a story, it's sort of a true crime nonfiction, although it's not real. It's more of a sociological exploration, a journalistic deep dive into this case of a series of arson cases between the end of 2012 and into the spring of 2013 on the eastern shore of Virginia. You find out pretty early on, I think at the end of the first chapter, you find out who the main suspect is that has been doing these arson, setting these fires. And in fact, I think there's in the end, over 80, I think, fires are set by this guy, and his I think it's told right in the, so I don't want to spoil it, but I mean, you can't really spoil it because like I said in the first chapter, you kind of find out it's this guy Charlie and his girlfriend Tanya are the ones that are the suspects. They are actually caught red-handed in the end at the scene of one of these fires. And it was fascinating because you start out, you learn about the volunteer fire department and how it impacts them to like night after night after night to have to go to these fires in the middle of the night. And you know, they're volunteers, they're not full-time firefighters, they have other jobs, they have families, but every night they're getting called to fires, and it's how exhausting it is and how that takes its toll. And then you learn about the history of the Eastern Shore and how it's rural, depressed area of the country. It could be a stand-in for many other rural, mostly white, depressed areas of the country, which was once, you know, thriving and very economically prosperous, but is now not. and I think, you know, you could say the same about many other rural places in the United States right now. And then you just continue to learn about Charlie and this girlfriend of his, Tanya, and their backgrounds and sort of how they end up on this crime spree. And then you end up at the end of the book in the courtroom with them and following the trial as it goes to trial and what happens. And you know, I wouldn't say that it has a particularly satisfying ending in terms of the legal aspect of this book, but as a case study of, you know, criminality and rural life, I found it fascinating. I live in a very rural area. We have a volunteer fire department, and I just kept picturing all the time, like, this story could have happened where I live easily. Like, we've had arsonists in our area, not so many fires, but serial arsonists. We've dealt with that very similar situation, and I was like, this could totally happen where I live. So I found it fascinating. Excellent book. Definitely recommend if you like nonfiction, sort of deep dives into criminal type activity, and also sort of a commentary on rural lifestyle. And the author is this, Monica Hesse is the author, and she is, this book grew out of an article that she wrote for the Washington Post, I believe. It's either the Washington Post, I believe it was the Washington Post. So she's a great journalist, and this is a fantastic read. Another excellent nonfiction. I've just been killing it this year on the nonfiction. I'm really excited about that. And then the last thing I have to talk to you about is, and I apologize because it's got the interlibrary loan sleeve on it and I don't want to take it off, but this is Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. As you may remember, I was listening to this on audiobook at the end of Nonfiction November. It was from the library. My borrowing period ran out unexpectedly. I wasn't paying attention and it went away, bye-bye, into the ether. And when I went to borrow it again, there was a waiting period. So I ended up going into my local physical library to see if I could borrow the physical copy. They didn't have it, but the librarian kindly borrowed it for me through interlibrary loan. And so this is basically an ecological history. It talks about why certain cultures have become dominant in the world and why would, for example, why did white Europeans conquer the extensive Aboriginal societies in North and South America? Why wasn't it African cultures that subjugated the rest of the world? Because we know from history and archaeology that humanity sort of began in Africa and the Fertile Crescent. And how is it that, you know, white society has ended up dominating so many other cultures? And it has to do with this author shows through extensive documentation how that has to do with the environment and the geography of the world than any inherent, intelligence or innovation or whatever from the actual people involved. It has to do with who won the lottery in terms of where they were located on the globe. And that has led to the current structure of cultures and societies today around the world. And this was a really excellent book. I know this is something that's taught in schools. I never encountered it when I was in school. Of course, it didn't come out until after I was out of high school and into college. So, that would explain that. But I didn't encounter it in college, and I've heard a lot about it, and I'm really glad that I took the time to track it down and find it and finish it. I did very much find a lot in this that was interesting to me. It was a little dry at times. The author is definitely more academic in tone than a lot of the nonfiction I like, but he interspersed it with enough examples and stories that I was able to follow along and not lose track of the points that he was trying to make. So definitely, if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to check it out. So that's it for me for what I've read so far in the first half of December. I'm hoping that I can get my mojo back with fiction and pick up some fiction. I've had some fiction books on my nightstand that I've been wanting to dive into, and I just haven't. I've just been really loving the nonfiction. But I've queued up Carrie by Stephen King on my audiobooks, and that will be a reread for me, and I love Stephen King, and so hopefully that will give me a nice jump start back into fiction. And I hope wherever you are, you're doing well and enjoying the holiday season and finding some time to read some good books, and I will talk to you later.